and welcome to Lunchtime Listens. I'm Emily.
I'm Megan.
And we are reading Twilight. So we took a break last week. No one read anything last week. So 2 weeks ago it was me and Anne reading, and we kind of stopped right in the middle of chapter 12 because we did not get to a good stop point. Chapter 12 has been a lot of setup. Billy showed up to watch the game with Charlie, and that's what made Anne so mad because she couldn't figure out what game it was, and so that's part of the reason it took us
Anne would be mad about it.
She was like, "There's no way it's football. It's a Thursday." She was going on and on. It was amazing. Billy basically has been like, Billy and Jacob have been like, "Stay away from Edward," and of course she's like, "No." So that's pretty much it. They're at school now, and yep, we just sort of have been setting up a potential trip. I think the trip with Edward or something like that. So, all right, here we go. I was sorely tempted to ditch the rest of the day, at the very least gym, but a warning instinct stopped me. I knew that if I disappeared now, Mike and others would assume I was with Edward, and Edward was worried about the time we'd spent together publicly if things went wrong. I refused to dwell on the last thought, concentrating instead on making things safer for him. It's funny because she knows he's a vampire. She knows he hunts. He's off hunting right now too. So they really mushed all of the conversations in the movie into the one wood scene.
Yeah.
It's been happening over the course of the last few chapters though. So yeah. So we are gonna get a really good scene coming up, but some things have already been established. I intuitively knew, and sensed he did too, that tomorrow would be pivotal. Our relationship couldn't continue to balance, as it did, on the point of a knife. We would fall off one edge or the other, depending entirely upon his decisions or his instincts. My decision was made before I'd ever consciously chosen, and I was committed to seeing it through, because there was nothing more terrifying to me, more excruciating, than the thought of turning away from him. It was an impossibility.
She's down bad.
Down bad crying at gym class. I went to class feeling dutiful. I couldn't honestly say what happened in biology. My mind was too preoccupied with thoughts of tomorrow. In gym, Mike was speaking to me again. He wished me a good time in Seattle. I carefully explained that I'd canceled my trip, worried about my truck. "Are you going to the dance with Cullen?" he asked, suddenly sulky. "No, I'm not going to the dance at all." "What are you going to do then?" he asked, too interested. My natural urge was to tell him to butt out. Instead, I lied brightly. "Laundry, and then I have to study for the trig test, or I'm going to fail." "Is Cullen helping you study?" "Edward," I emphasized, "is not going to help me study. He's gone away somewhere for the weekend." The lies came more naturally than usual, I noted with surprise. "Oh," he perked up. "You could come to the dance with our group anyway. That would be cool. We'd all dance with you," he promised. The mental image of Jessica's face made my tone sharper than necessary. "I'm not going to the dance, Mike, okay?" "Fine," he sulked again. "I was just offering." When the school day had finally ended, I walked to the parking lot without enthusiasm. I did not especially want to walk home, but I couldn't see how he was retrieving my truck. Then again, I was starting to believe that nothing was impossible for him. The latter instinct proved correct. My truck sat in the same space he parked his Volvo in the morning. I shook my head incredulous as I opened the unlocked door and saw the key in the ignition. I did have a fun visual of Edward carrying the truck to school. I know he found the key, but she was because he drove her to school and he was like, "By the way, I'm leaving." And she's like, "But I guess I'll walk home." He's like, "No, your truck will be here." She's like, "But you don't know where the keys are." Of course he found the keys, but I thought he would just carry it.
That's pretty funny.
I like my version better. There was a piece of white paper folded on my seat. I got in and closed the door before I unfolded it. 2 words were written in his elegant script: "Be safe." The sound of the truck roared to life frightened me. I laughed at myself. When I got home, the handle of the door was locked and the deadbolt unlocked, just as I'd left it this morning. Inside, I went straight to do the laundry. It looked just the same as I'd left it too. I dug for my jeans, and after finding them, checked the pockets. Empty. Maybe I'd hung my key up after all, I thought, shaking my head. Following the same instinct that had prompted me to lie to Mike, I called Jessica on the pretense of wishing her luck at the dance. When she offered the same wish for my day with Edward, I told her about the cancellation. She was more disappointed than really necessary for a third-party observer to be. I said goodbye quickly after that. Charlie was absent-minded at dinner, worrying over something at work, I guessed, or maybe a basketball game, or maybe he was just enjoying the lasagna. It was hard to tell with Charlie. You know, Dad, I began, breaking into his reverie. Oh my gosh, I can read. What's that, Belle? I think you're right about Seattle. I think I'll wait till Jessica or someone else can go with me. Oh, he said, surprised. Oh, okay. So do you want me to stay home? No, Dad, don't change your plans. I've got a million things to do. Homework, laundry, I need to go to the library and the grocery store. I'll be in and out all day. You go and have fun. Are you sure? Absolutely, Dad. Besides, the freezer is getting dangerously low on fish. We're down to 2, maybe 3 years supply. You're sure easy to live with, Bella, he smiled. I could say the same about you, I said, laughing. The sound of my laughter was off, but he didn't seem to notice. I felt so guilty for deceiving him that I almost took Edward's advice and told him where I would be. Almost. After dinner, I folded clothes and moved another load through the dryer. Unfortunately, it was the kind of job that only keeps hands busy. My mind definitely had too much free time, and it was getting out of control. I fluctuated between anticipation so intense that it was very nearly pain and an insidious fear that picked at my resolve. I had to keep reminding myself that I made my choice. I wasn't going back on it. I pulled his note out of my pocket much more often than necessary to absorb the 2 small words he'd written. He wanted me to be safe, I told myself again and again. I would just hold on to the faith in the end that desire would win over the others, over his natural instinct to murder her. Oh, man.
She's like, no, I should not have my feelings of self-preservation, Lynn.
Yes, no, don't question that. No.
You're fine.
And what was my other choice? To cut him out of my life? Intolerable. Besides, since I'd come to Forks, it really seemed like my life was about him. Lord.
That's healthy.
To be a teenager.
Great.
But a tiny voice in the back of my mind worried, wondering if it would hurt very much if it ended badly. Probably.
I mean, yeah.
Safe bet.
I don't like mosquito bites. I don't think like a vampire bite will be better.
No. Oh, God. I was relieved when it was late enough to be acceptable for bedtime. I knew I was far too stressed to sleep, so I did something I'd never done before. I deliberately took unnecessary cold medicine, the kind that knocked me out for a good 8 hours. I normally wouldn't condone that type of behavior of myself, but tomorrow would be complicated enough without me being loopy from sleep deprivation on top of everything else. While I waited for the drugs to kick in, I dried my clean hair till it was impeccably straight and fussed over what I would wear tomorrow. With everything ready for the morning, I finally lay in my bed. I felt hyper. I couldn't stop twitching. I got up and rifled through my shoebox of CDs until I found a collection of Chopin's Nocturnes. I put that on very quietly and then laid down again, concentrating on relaxing individual parts of my body. Somewhere in the middle of that exercise, the cold pills took effect and I gladly sank into unconsciousness. I woke early, having slept soundly and dreamlessly thanks to my gratuitous drug use. Sorry, just the phrasing of that. Though I was well rested, I slipped right back into the same hectic frenzy from the night before. I dressed in a rush, smoothing my collar against my neck, fidgeting with the tan sweater till it hung right over my jeans. I sneaked a quick look out the window to see that Charlie was already gone. A thin, cottony layer of clouds veiled the sky. They didn't look very lasting. I ate breakfast without tasting the food, hurrying to clean up when I was done. I peeked out the window again, but nothing had changed. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was heading back downstairs when a quiet knock sent my heart thudding against my rib cage. I flew to the door. I had little trouble with the simple deadbolt, but I yanked the door open at last, and there he was. All the agitation dissolved as soon as I looked at his face, calm taking its place. I breathed a sigh of relief. Yesterday's fears seemed foolish with him here. He wasn't smiling at first. His face was somber, but then his expression lightened as he looked me over. He laughed. "Good morning," he chuckled. "What's wrong?" I glanced down to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important, like shoes or pants. "We match," he laughed again. I realized he had a long, light tan sweater on with white collar showing underneath and blue jeans. I laughed with him, hiding my secret twinge of regret. Why did he have to look like a runway model when I couldn't? Because he's a vampire. But anyways, logic. I locked the door behind me while he was walking to the truck. He passed by the passenger door with a martyred expression that was easy to understand. "We made a deal," I reminded him smugly, climbing into the driver's seat and reached over to unlock his door. "Where to?" I asked. Put your seatbelt on. I'm nervous already." I gave him a dirty look as I complied. "Where to?" I repeated with a sigh. "Take the 101 north," he ordered. It was surprisingly difficult to concentrate on the road while feeling his gaze on my face. I compensated by driving more carefully than usual, through the still sleeping town. "Were you planning to make it out of Forks before nightfall?" "This truck is old enough to be your car's grandfather. Have some respect," I retorted. We were soon out of the town's limits, despite his negativity. Thick underbrush and green swathed trunks replaced the lawns and houses. "Turn right on the 110, he instructed just as I was about to ask. I obeyed silently. "Now we drive until the pavement ends." I could hear a smile in his voice, but I was too afraid of driving off the road and proving him right to look over and be sure. "And what's there at the pavement's end?" I wondered. "A trail." "We're hiking?" Thank goodness I'd worn my tennis shoes. "Is that a problem?" He sounded as if he'd expected as much. "No," I tried to make the lie sound convincing. "But if you thought my truck was slow..." "Don't worry, it's only 5 miles or so, and we're in no hurry." 5 miles? I didn't answer so that he wouldn't hear my voice crack in panic. 5 miles of treacherous roots and loose stones trying to twist my ankles and otherwise incapacitate me. This was going to be humiliating.
I'd be so annoyed if no one did not tell me what we were doing. And I know what's gonna happen, but she's wearing jeans.
Yeah.
Thank goodness she wore tennis shoes.
No, you're totally right.
Come on, dude.
You gotta tell a girl what to where you're going so
What's
she
the
can
vibe?
so she can dress accordingly. Yeah? No, you're right. Thank goodness she wore tennis shoes, Edward. What are you thinking? He asked as I asked impatiently after a few moments. I lied again. Just wondering where we're going. It's a place I like to go when the weather's nice. We both glanced out the window as the thinning clouds after he spoke. Charlie said it would be warm today. And did you tell Charlie what you were up to? He asked. Nope. But Jessica thinks we're going to Seattle together. He seemed cheered by the idea. No, I told her you canceled on me, which is true. No one knows you're with me? Angrily now. That depends. I assume you told Alice. That's very helpful, Bella, he snapped. I pretended I didn't hear that. Are you so desperate by Forks that it's making you suicidal? He demanded when I ignored him. That's actually a valid question. You said it might cause trouble for you, us being together publicly, I reminded him. So you're worried about the trouble it might cause me if you don't come home. His voice was still angry, and bitingly sarcastic. Bitingly. I nodded, keeping my eye on the road. He muttered something under his breath, speaking so quickly that I couldn't understand. We were silent for the rest of the drive. I could feel the waves of infuriated disapproval rolling off him, and I could think of nothing to say. And then the road ended, constricting to a thin foot trail with a small wooden marker. I parked on a narrow shoulder and stepped out, afraid because he was angry with me, and I didn't have driving as an excuse to not look at him. It was warm now, warmer than it had been in Forks warmer than it had been in Forks since the day I arrived, almost muggy under the clouds. I pulled off my sweater and knotted it around my waist. Glad I'd worn the light sleeveless shirt, especially if I had 5 miles of hiking ahead of me. I heard his door slam and looked over to see that he'd removed his sweater too. He was facing away from me into the unbroken forest beside my truck. This way, he said, glancing over his shoulder at me, eyes still annoyed. He started into the dark forest. The trail? Panic was clear in my voice as I hurried around the truck to catch up with him. I said there was a trail at the end of the road, not that we were taking it. No trail? I asked desperately. I won't let you get lost. He turned. So worried about it, no one knowing where she is, but then let's not take the trail. He turned with a mocking smile, and I stifled a gasp. His white shirt was sleeveless, and he wore it unbuttoned, so that the smooth white skin of his throat flowed uninterrupted over the marble contours of his chest. His perfect musculature, oh my goodness, no longer merely hidden behind a concealing clothes. He was too perfect, I realized, with a piercing stab of despair. There was no way his godlike creature could be meant for me.
Well, yes, like, he's made like that for a reason, like you said. It's also like, so he has a sleeveless buttoned shirt, like, so like collared shirts.
That he had unbuttoned.
Yeah, they're just like flowing in the wind, like.
Just trying to be Fabio.
Like, what an image. He's like, why does it have this unbuttoned? Was it unbuttoned under the sweater?
Yeah, ready for the hike.
Is he also wearing jeans? I think they are wearing the same outfit.
Yeah.
What a weirdo.
He stared at me, bewildered by my tormented expression. Do you want to go home? He said quietly, a different pain than mine saturating his voice. No. I walked forward till I was close beside him, anxious not to waste 1 second of whatever time I might have with him. What's wrong? He asked in his gentle voice. I'm not a good hiker, I answered dully. You'll have to be very patient. I can be patient, if I make a great effort. He smiled, holding my glance, trying to lift me out of my sudden, unexplained dejection. I tried to smile back, but the smile was unconvincing. He scrutinized my face. I'll take you home, he promised. I couldn't tell if the promise was unconditional or restricted to an immediate departure. I knew he thought it was fear that upset me, and I was grateful again that I was the one person whose mind he couldn't hear. If you want me to hack 5 miles through the jungle before sundown, you better start leading the way, I said acidly. He frowned at me, struggling to understand my tone and expression. He gave up after a moment and led the way into the forest. It wasn't as hard as I had feared. The way was mostly flat, and he held the damp ferns and webs and moss aside for me. When his straight path took us over fallen trees or boulders, he would help me, lifting me by the elbow and then releasing me instantly when I was clear. His cold touch on my skin never failed to make my heart thud erratically. Twice, when that happened, I caught a look on his face that made me sure he could somehow hear it. I tried to keep my eyes away from his perfection as much as possible, but I slipped often. Each time, his beauty pierced me through with its sadness. For the most part, we walked in silence. Occasionally, he would ask random questions that he hadn't gotten to in the past 2 days of interrogation. He asked about my birthday, my grades, my grade school teachers, my childhood pets, and I had to admit that after killing 3 fish in a row, I'd given up on the whole situation. He laughed at that, louder than I was used to, bell-like echoes bouncing back from us from the empty woods. The hike took me most of the morning, but he never showed any signs of impatience. The forest spread out around us in a boundless labyrinth of ancient trees, and I began to be nervous that we would never find our way out again. He was perfectly at ease, comfortable in the green maze, never seeming to feel any doubt about our direction. After several hours, the light that filtered through the canopy transformed. The murky olive tone shifted to a brighter jade. The day had turned sunny, just as he had foretold. For the first time since we entered the woods, I felt a thrill of excitement, which quickly turned to impatience. Are we there yet? I teased, pretending to scowl. Nearly, he smiled at the change in my mood. Do you see the brightness ahead? I peered into the thick forest. Should I? He smirked. Maybe it's a bit too soon for your eyes. Time to visit the optometrist, I muttered. His smirk grew more pronounced. But then after 100 yards, I could definitely see a lighting in the trees ahead, a glow that was yellow instead of green. I picked up the pace, my eagerness growing with every step. He let me lead now, following noiselessly. I reached the edge of the pool of light and stepped through the last fringe of ferns into the loveliest place I had ever seen. The meadow was small, perfectly round, and filled with wild flowers, violet, yellow, and soft white. Somewhere nearby, I could hear the bubbling murmur of a stream. The sun was directly overhead, filling the circle with a haze of buttery sunshine. I walked slowly, awestruck, through the soft grass, swaying flowers, and warm, gilded air. I halfway turned, wanting to share this with him, but he wasn't behind me where I thought he'd be. I spun around, searching for him with sudden alarm. Finally, I spotted him, still under the dense shade of the canopy at the edge of the hollow, watching me with cautious eyes. Only then did I remember what the beauty of the meadow had driven from my mind, the enigma of Edward and the sun, which he'd promised to illustrate for me today. I took a step back towards him, my eyes alight with curiosity. His eyes were wary, reluctant. I smiled encouragingly and beckoned to him with my hand, taking another step back to him. He held up a hand in warning, and I hesitated, rocking back onto my heels. Edward seemed to take a breath, and then he stepped out into the bright glow of the midday sun. And I'm so happy that because of the way it worked out, I get to read a little bit of this chapter too. So here we go. Chapter 13, Confessions. Edward in the sunlight was shocking. I couldn't get used to it, though I'd been staring at him all afternoon. His skin white despite the faint flush from yesterday's hunting trip, literally sparkled, like thousands of tiny diamonds were embedded in the surface. Stephanie really was like, I have to find something that's gonna make my vampires stand out. They're gonna glitter. I love it.
She's like, what? Like, I don't know if that would make me want to approach a vampire if it was like glittering in the sun.
Yeah.
I'd be like, what the heck?
I'd be like, maybe not today. You're right. He lay perfectly still in the grass, his shirt opened over his sculpted incandescent chest. His skates... What is that word?
Scintillating?
Scintillating, oh my goodness.
She uses a lot of weird words.
Okay, thank you.
It does not roll off the tongue.
Okay.
Her word choice is so fascinating.
I agree. Okay, I'm glad it wasn't just me. His glistening, pale lavender lids were shut, though of course he didn't sleep. A perfect statue carved into some unknown stone, smooth like marble, glistening like crystal. Now and then his lips would move, so fast it looked like they were trembling. But when I asked, he told me that he was singing to himself, and it was too low for me to hear.
What is he singing?
Just sing! Like, that's weirder!
That is weirder! Some song that was, really hot in 1917? Like, what song is it?
Making her sit in silence and just watching him glitter.
What song could it even be? Like...
I'm very curious too. I enjoyed the sun too, though the air wasn't quite dry enough for my taste. I would have liked to lie back as he did and let the sun warm my face, but I stayed curled up, my chin resting on my knees, unwilling to take my eyes off him. The wind was gentle, it tangled my hair and ruffled the grass that swayed around his motionless form. The meadow, so spectacular to me at first, paled next to his magnificence. Hesitantly, always afraid, even now, that he would disappear like a mirage, too beautiful to be real, hesitantly, I reached out with one finger and stroked the back of his shimmering hand where it laid within my reach. I marveled again at the perfect texture, satin smooth, cool as stone. When I looked up again, his eyes were open, watching me. Butterscotch today, lighter, warmer after hunting. His quick smile turned up in the corners of his flawless lips. I don't scare you? He asked playfully, but I could hear the real curiosity in his soft voice. No more than usual. He smiled wider, his teeth flashed in the sun. I inched closer, stretching out my whole hand now to trace the contours of his forearm with my fingertips. I saw that my fingers trembled and knew it wouldn't escape his notice. Do you mind? I asked, for he had closed his eyes again. No, he said without opening his eyes. You can't imagine how that feels, he sighed. I lightly trailed my hand over the perfect muscles of his arm, followed the faint pattern of bluish veins inside the crease of his elbow. With my other hand, I reached to turn his hand over. Realizing what I wished, he flipped his palm up in one of those blindingly fast, disconnected movements of his. It startled me. My fingers froze on the arm for a brief second. Sorry, he murmured. I looked up in time to see his golden eyes again. It's too easy to be myself with you. I lifted his hand, turning it this way and that as I watched the sun glitter on his palm. I held it close to my face, trying to see the hidden facets in his skin. Tell me what you're thinking, he whispered. I looked to see his eyes watching me, suddenly intent. It's still so strange for me, not knowing. You know, the rest of us feel like that all the time. It's a hard life. Did I imagine a hint of regret in his tone? But you didn't tell me. I was wishing that I could know what you were thinking. I hesitated. And I was wishing that I could believe that you were real. And I was wishing that I wasn't afraid. I don't want you to be afraid. His voice was a soft murmur. He's been telling her to be afraid this whole time. Mixed messages.
Freaking Edward.
His voice was just a soft murmur. I heard what he couldn't truthfully say, that I didn't need to be afraid, that there was nothing to fear. Well, that's not exactly the fear I meant, though that's certainly something to think about. So quickly that I missed his movement, he was half sitting, propped up on his right arm, his left palm still in my hands. His angel's face was only a few inches from mine. I should have, flinched away from his unexpected closeness, but I was unable to move. His golden eyes mesmerized me. What are you afraid of then? He whispered intently. But I couldn't answer, as I had just once before. I smelled his cool breath in my face. Sweet, delicious, the scent made my mouth water. But he doesn't breathe. I'm sorry, I'm like really caught up on that. He doesn't breathe. So how does she smell his breath?
I think sometimes maybe he breathes like naturally, or sometimes he'll, or maybe it's like his breath from talking.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. That was a weird thing to get hung up on.
I'm just imagining like her, like she's like really investigating his skin. Like what if she like would a magnifying glass like blind her? She's like looking at his skin in the sun.
It would be like a reverse like frying.
Yeah. That's what I keep thinking about.
We need to get Bella a magnifying glass for this experiment. I love it. But I couldn't answer. Never mind. It was unlike anything else. Instinctively, unthinkingly, I leaned closer, inhaling. And he was gone, his hand ripped from mine. In the time it took my eyes to focus, he was 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the small meadow in the deep shade of a huge fir tree. He stared at me, his eyes dark in the shadow, his expression unreadable. I could feel the hurt and shock on my face. My empty hands stung. I'm sorry, Edward, I whispered. I knew he could hear. Give me a moment, he called, just loud enough for my less sensitive ears. I sat very still. After 10 incredibly long seconds, he walked back, slowly for him. He stopped, still several feet away, and sank gracefully to the ground, crossing his legs. His eyes never left mine. He took 2 deep breaths and then smiled in apology. I am so very sorry, he hesitated. Would you understand what I meant if I said I was only human? I nodded once, not quite able to smile at his joke. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins as the realization of danger slowly sank in. He could smell that from where he sat. He smiled, his smile turned mocking. I'm the world's best predator, aren't I? Everything about me invites you in. My voice, my face, even my smell. As if I need any of that. Unexpectedly, he was on his feet, bounding away, instantly out of sight, only to appear beneath the same tree as before, having circled the meadow in a half a second. As if you could outrun me, he laughed bitterly. Here's the movie scene.
Heck yeah.
Let's go. He's getting mad. He reached up with one hand and with a defiant crack effortlessly ripped a 2-foot thick branch from the trunk of a spruce. He balanced it on that hand for a moment and then threw it with blinding speed, shattering it against another huge tree, which shook and trembled at the blow. And he was in front of me again, standing 2 feet away, still as stone. As if you could fight me off, he said gently. I sat without moving, more frightened of him than I had ever been. I'd never seen him so completely freed of that careful, cultivated facade. He'd never been less human or more beautiful. Face ashen, eyes wide, I sat like a bird locked into the eyes of a snake. His lovely eyes seemed to glow with rash excitement. Then, as the second passed, they dimmed. His expression slowly folded into a mask of ancient sadness. Don't be afraid, he murmured, his velvet voice unintentionally seductive. I promise, he hesitated. I swear not to hurt you. He seemed more concerned with convincing himself than me. Red flag! Red flag! Don't be afraid, he whispered again, as he stepped closer with exaggerated slowness. He sat sinuously with deliberately unhurried movements till our faces were on the same level, just a foot apart. Please forgive me, he said formally. I can control myself. You caught me off guard, but I'm on my best behavior now. He waited, but I still couldn't speak. I'm not thirsty today, honestly, he winked. At that I had to laugh, though the sound was shaky and breathless. Are you all right? He asked tenderly, reaching out slowly, carefully, to place his marble hand in the back of mine. I looked at his smooth, cold hands, and then at his eyes. They were soft, repentant. I looked back at his hand, and then deliberately returned to tracing the lines in his hands with my fingertips. I looked up and smiled timidly. His answering smile was dazzling. So where were we before I behaved so rudely? He asked in that gentle cadence of an earlier century. I honestly can't remember. He smiled, but his face was ashamed. I think we were talking about why you were afraid, besides the obvious reason. Oh, right. Well, I looked down at his hand, doodling aimlessly across his smooth, iridescent palm. The seconds ticked by. How easily frustrated I am, he said. How easily frustrated I am, he sighed, looking into his eyes, abruptly grasping that this was every bit as new to him as it was to me. As many years of unfathomable experience as he had, this was hard for him too. I took courage from that thought. I was afraid because, for, well, obvious reasons, I can't stay with you. And I'm afraid that I'd like to stay with you much more than I should. I looked down at his hands as I spoke. It was difficult for me to say this out loud. Yes, he agreed slowly. That is something to be afraid of indeed. Wanting to be with me, that's really not in your best interest. I frowned. I should have left long ago, he sighed. I should leave now, but I don't know if I can. I don't want you to leave, I mumbled pathetically, staring down again. Which is exactly why I should. But don't worry, I'm essentially a selfish creature. I crave your company too much to do what I should. I'm glad. Don't be. He withdrew his hand more gently this time. His voice was harsher than usual. Harsh for him, still more beautiful than any human voice. It was hard to keep up. His sudden mood change left me always a step behind, dazzled. It's not your company I crave. Never forget that. Never forget I'm more dangerous to you than I am to anyone else. He stopped, looking to see him gazing unseeingly into the forest. That's a good stopping point because he's like, don't be afraid of me, be afraid of me, don't be afraid of me, be afraid. Ah! I can't keep up, but that's a good spot for you to take over.
I thought for a moment, I don't think I understand exactly what you mean. By the last part anyway, I said. He looked back at me and smiled, his mood shifting yet again. How do I explain, he mused, and without frightening you again? Without seeming to think about it, he placed his hand back in mine. I held it tightly in both of mine. He looked at our hands. That's amazingly pleasant, the warmth. He sighed. A moment passed as he assembled his thoughts. You know how everyone enjoys different flavors, he began. Some people love chocolate ice cream, others prefer strawberry. I nodded. Sorry about the food analogy. I couldn't think of another way to explain it. I smiled. He smiled ruefully back. You see, every person smells different, has a different essence. If you locked an alcoholic in a room full of stale beer, he'd gladly drink it. But he could resist if you wished to, if you were a recovering alcoholic. Now, let's say you placed in that room a glass of 100-year-old brandy, the rarest, finest cognac, and filled the room with its warm aroma. How do you think you would fare then? We sat silently, looking into each other's eyes, trying to read each other's thoughts. He broke the silence first. Maybe that's not the right comparison. I mean, yeah, this is like a YA book. Why is she talking about cognac? Whatever. Maybe it's too easy to turn down the brandy. Perhaps I should have made our alcoholic a heroin addict instead.
Even better.
So what you're saying is, I'm your brand of heroin? I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He smiled swiftly, seeming to appreciate my effort. Yes, you are exactly my brand of heroin. What's even funnier is like Stephanie Meyer's Mormon, and like they don't drink alcohol either.
Yeah.
So I'm just like,
none of these metaphors.
Okay. Does that happen often? I asked. He looked across the treetops, thinking through his response. I spoke to my brothers about it. He still stared into the distance. To Jasper, every one of you is much the same. He's the most recent to join our family. It's a struggle for him to abstain at all. He hasn't had time to grow sensitive to the differences in smell and flavor.
Some foreshadowing.
He glanced swiftly at me, his expression apologetic. Sorry, he said. I don't mind. Please don't worry about offending me or frightening me or whichever. That's the way you think. I can understand, or I can try to at least. Just explain however you can. He took a deep breath and gazed at the sky again. So Jasper wasn't sure if he'd ever come across someone who was as, he hesitated, looking for the right word, appealing as you are to me. Which makes me think not. Emmett has been on the wagon longer, so to speak, and he understood what I meant. He says twice for him, one stronger than the other. And for you? Never. The word hung there for a moment in the warm breeze. What did Emmett do? I asked to break the silence. It was the wrong question to ask. His face grew dark, his hand clenched into a fist inside mine. He looked away. I waited, but he wasn't going to answer. I guess I know, I finally said. He lifted his eyes. His expression was wistful, pleading. Even the strongest of us fall off the wagon, don't we? What are you asking? My permission? My voice was sharper than I intended. I tried to make my tone kinder. I could guess what his honesty must cost him. I mean, is there no hope then?
No!
How calmly I could discuss my own death. No, he was instantly contrite. Of course there's hope. I mean, of course I won't. He left the sentence hanging. His eyes burned into mine. It's different for us. Emmett, these were strangers he happened across. It was a long time ago, and he wasn't as practiced, as careful as he is now. He fell silent and watched me intently as I thought it through. So if we'd met, in a dark alley or something, I trailed off. It took everything I had not to jump up in the middle of that class full of children, and he stopped abruptly, looking away. When you walked past me, I could have ruined everything Carlisle had built for us, right then and there. If I hadn't been denying my thirst for the last, too many years, I wouldn't have been able to stop myself. He paused, scowling at the trees. He glanced at me grimly, both of us remembering. He must have thought I was possessed. I couldn't understand why, how you could hate me so quickly. To me, it was like you were some kind of demon, summoned straight from my own personal hell to ruin me.
How romantic.
The fragrance coming off your skin. I thought it would make me deranged that first day. In that 1 hour, I thought of 100 different ways to lure you from the room with me, to get you alone. And I thought of each back, thinking of my family, what I could do to them. I had to run out, to get away before I could speak the words that would make you follow. He looked up at my staggered expression as I tried to absorb his bitter memories. His golden eyes scorched from under his lashes, hypnotic and deadly. You would have come, he promised. I tried to speak calmly. Without a doubt. He frowned down at my hands, releasing me from the force of his stare. And then, as I tried to rearrange my schedule in a pointless attempt to avoid you, you were there, in that close, warm little room. The scent was maddening. I so very nearly took you out then. There is only one other frail human there, so easily dealt with. I shivered in the warm sun, seeing my memories anew through his eyes, only now grasping the danger. Poor Miss Cope. I shivered again at how close I'd come to being inadvertently responsible for her death. Oh yeah, because you're responsible. Bella!
Yeah.
Shut up!
It wouldn't be Edward's fault.
Gosh, my gosh. But I resisted. I don't know how. I forced myself not to wait for you, not to follow you from the school. It was easier outside, when I couldn't smell you anymore, to think clearly, to make the right decision. I left the others near home. I was too ashamed to tell them how weak I was. They only knew something was very wrong. And I went straight to Carlisle, at the hospital, to tell him I was leaving. I stared at him in surprise. I traded cars with him. He had a full tank of gas, and I didn't want to stop. I didn't dare to go home, to face Esme. She wouldn't have let me go without a scene. She would have tried to convince me that it wasn't necessary. By the next morning, I was in Alaska. He sounded ashamed, as if admitting a great cowardice. I spent 2 days there with some old acquaintances, but I was homesick. I hated knowing I upset Esme and the rest of them, my adopted family. In the pure air of the mountains, it was hard to believe you were so irresistible. I convinced myself it was weak to run away. I've dealt with temptation before, not of this magnitude, not even close, but I was strong. Who you were, an insignificant little girl, he grinned suddenly, to chase me from the place I wanted to be. So I came back. He stared off into space. I couldn't speak. I took precautions, hunting, feeding more than usual before seeing you again. I was sure that I was strong enough to treat you like any other human. I was arrogant about it. It was unquestionably a complication that I couldn't simply read your thoughts to know what your reaction was to me. I wasn't used to having to go to such circuitous measures, listening to your words in Jessica's mind. Her mind isn't very original, and it was annoying to have to stoop to that.
Ouch! I mean, we have been making fun of Jessica this whole time, but... Dang.
And then I couldn't know if you really meant what you said. It was all extremely irritating. That's life, man. I don't know. Like, you could ask Bella.
Welcome to our world.
He frowned at the memory. I wanted you to forget my behavior that first day, if possible. So I tried to talk with you, like I would with any person. I was eager, actually, hoping to decipher some of your thoughts. But you were too interesting. I found myself caught up in your expressions. And every now and then you would stir the air with your hand or your hair, and the scent would stun me again. Of course, then you were nearly crushed to death in front of my eyes. Later, I thought of a perfectly good excuse for why I acted at that moment. Because if I hadn't saved you, if your blood had been spilled there in front of me, I don't think I could have stopped myself from exposing us for what we are. But I only thought of that excuse later. At the time, all I could think was, not her. He closed his eyes, lost in his agonized confession. I listened, more eager than rational. Common sense told me I should be terrified. Instead, I was relieved to finally understand, and I was filled with compassion for his suffering. Even now, as he confessed his craving to take my life, I was finally able to speak, though my voice was faint. In the hospital? His eyes flashed up to mine. I was appalled. I couldn't believe I had put us in danger after all, put myself in your power, you of all people, as if I needed another motive to kill you. We both flinched as the word slipped out.
Yeah.
But it had the opposite effect, he continued quickly. I fought with Rosalie, Emmett, and Jasper when they suggested that now was the time, the worst fight we've ever had. Carlisle sided with me, and Alice. He grimaced when he said her name. I couldn't imagine why. Esme told me to do whatever I had to do in order to stay. He shook his head indulgently. All that next day, I eavesdropped on the minds of everyone you spoke to, shocked that you kept your word. I didn't understand you at all, but I knew that it couldn't become more involved with you. I did my very best to stay as far from you as possible, and every day that perfume of your skin, your breath, your hair, it hit me as hard as the very first day.
These last 2 pages, like, it has been all Edward talking.
Yeah.
Like, these last, like, 2 or 3 pages, and I just had this thought that, like, this is probably what made Stephanie, like, sit there and be like, I should write this from Edward's point of view, too, because we're getting a whole recap.
Man, I did like it was very exciting when Midnight Sun came out.
It was.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if this was like a more traditional romance novel where it did go back and forth?
Oh,
between
yeah.
their views?
That would actually be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Next time, Stephanie.
Why not? But I knew. Okay. He met my eyes again, and they were surprisingly tender. And for all that, he continued, I'd have fared better if I had exposed us all in that first moment than if now, here, with no witnesses and nothing to stop me, I were to hurt you. I was human enough to have to ask, why? Isabella. He pronounced my full name carefully, then playfully ruffled my hair with his free hand. A shock ran through my body at his casual touch. Ella, I couldn't live with myself if I ever hurt you. You don't know how it's tortured me. He looked down, ashamed again. The thought of you, still, white, cold, to never see you blush scarlet again, to never see that flash of intuition in your eyes when you see through my pretenses, it would be unendurable. He lifted his glorious, agonized eyes to mine. You're the most important thing to me now. The most important thing to me ever. My head was spinning at the rapid change in direction our conversation had taken. From the cheerful topic of my impending demise, we were suddenly declaring ourselves. He waited, and even though I looked down to study our hands between us, I knew his golden eyes were on me. You already know how I feel, of course, I finally said. I'm here, which roughly translated means I would rather die than stay away from you. I frowned. I'm an idiot. You are an idiot, he agreed with a laugh.
We all agree.
Yes. Our eyes met, and I laughed too. We laughed together at the idiocy and sheer possibility of such a moment. And so, the lion fell in love with the lamb. He said it.
He said it!
He murmured. He loves to murmur. Why is he always murmuring?
Speak up.
I looked away, hiding my eyes as thrilled to the world. What a stupid lamb, I sighed. What a sick, masochistic lion. He stared into the shadowy forest for a long moment, and I wondered where his thoughts had taken him.
I have a memory of thinking that was such a good line as a kid. It's like, so romantic.
I'm sure I wrote that in a t-shirt at some point.
Yeah, probably.
Why? I began, and then paused, not sure how to continue. He looked at me and smiled. Sunlight glinted off his face. His teeth. Yes? Tell me why you ran from me before. His smile faded. You know why. No, I mean, exactly what did I do wrong? I'll have to be on my guard, you see, so I better start learning what I shouldn't do. This, for example, I stroked the back of his hand. Seems to be all right. He smiled again. You didn't do anything wrong, Bella. It was my fault. But I want to help, if I can, to not make this harder for you. Well, he contemplated for a moment. It was just how close you were. Most humans instinctively shy away from us, are repelled by our alienness. I wasn't expecting you to come so close. And the smell of your throat. He stopped short, looking to see if he'd upset me. Okay then, I said flippantly, trying to alleviate the sudden tense atmosphere. I tucked my chin. No throat exposure.
Okay, that is funny.
She just throws up in like really intense turtlenecks.
That is actually really funny.
It worked. He laughed. No, really, it was more the surprise than anything else. He raised his free hand and placed it gently on the side of my neck. I sat very still, the chill of his touch a natural warning, a warning telling me to be terrified. But there was no feeling of fear in me. There were, however, other feelings. ... You see, he said, perfectly fine. My blood was racing, and I wished I could slow it, sensing that this must make everything so much more difficult. The thudding in my pulse and my veins. Surely he could hear it. The blush on your cheeks is lovely, he murmured. He did it again!
Murmured.
He gently freed his other hand. My hands fell limply into my lap. Softly, he brushed my cheek, then held my face between his marble hands. Be very still, he whispered, as if I wasn't already frozen. Slowly, never moving his eyes from mine, he leaned toward me. Then, abruptly, but very gently, he rested a cold cheek against the hollow at the base of my throat. I was quite unable to move, even if I'd wanted to. I listened to the sound of his even breathing, watching the sun and wind playing his bronze hair, more human than any other part of him. With deliberate slowness, his hand slid down the sides of my neck. I shivered, and I heard him catch his breath. But his hands didn't pause, and they softly moved to my shoulders, and then stopped. His face drifted to the side, his nose skimming across my collarbone. He came to rest with the side of his face pressed tenderly against my chest.
It's like,
I know!
like he's got it, if her chest is here and he's got his head here, he's like reaching up. How is this?
Okay, Edward. Weirdo. Listening to my heart. Ah, he sighed. I don't know how long we sat without moving. It could have been hours. Eventually, the throb of my pulse quieted, but he didn't move or speak again as he held me. I knew at any moment it could be too much, and my life could end. So quickly that I might not even notice. And I couldn't make myself be afraid. I couldn't think of anything except he was touching me. And then, too soon, he released me. His eyes were peaceful. It won't be so hard again, he said with satisfaction. Was that very hard for you? Not nearly as bad as I imagined it would be. And you? No, it wasn't bad. For me. He smiled at my inflection. You know what I mean. I smiled. Here. He took my hand and placed it against his cheek. Do you feel how warm it is? It was almost warm, his usually icy skin. But I barely noticed, for I was touching his face, something I dreamed of constantly since the first day I'd seen him. Don't move, I whispered. No one could be still like Edward. He closed his eyes and became as immobile as stone, a carving under my hand. I moved even more slowly than he had, careful not to make one unexpected move. I caressed his cheek, delicately stroked his eyelid, the purple shadow in the hollow under his eye. I traced the shape of his perfect nose, and then, so carefully, his flawless lips. His lips parted under my hand, and I could feel his cool breath on my fingertips. I wanted to lean in, to inhale the scent of him, so I dropped my hand and leaned away, not wanting to push him too far. He opened his eyes, and they were hungry. Not in a way to make me fear, but rather to tighten the muscles in the pit of my stomach and send my pulse hammering through my veins again. I wish, he whispered, I wish you could feel the complexity, the confusion I feel, that you could understand.
You'll never understand me, Bella.
You don't know what it's like to be me. He raised his hand to my hair, then carefully brushed it across my face. Tell me, I breathed. I don't think I can. I've told you, on the one hand, the hunger, the thirst, that deplorable creature that I am. I feel for you, and I think you can understand that, to an extent. Though, he half smiled, as you are not addicted to any illegal substances, you probably can't empathize completely. But his fingers touched my lips lightly, making me shiver again. There are other hungers I don't even understand, that are foreign to me. I may understand that better than you think. I'm not used to feeling so human. Is it always like this? For me? I paused. No, never. Never before this. He held my hands between his. They felt so feeble in his iron strength. I don't know how to be close to you, he admitted. I don't know if I can. I leaned forward very slowly, cautioning him with my eyes. I placed my cheek against his stone chest. I could hear his breath, and nothing else. This is enough, he sighed, closing my eyes. In a very human gesture, he put his arms around me and pressed his face against my hair. You're better at this than you give yourself credit for, I noted. I have even human instincts, They may be buried deep, but they're there. We sat like that for another immeasurable moment, and wondered if he could be as unwilling to move as I was. But I could see the light was fading, the shadow of the forest beginning to touch us, and I sighed. You have to go. I thought you couldn't read my mind. It's getting clearer. I could hear a smile in his voice. He took my shoulders, and I looked into his face. Can I show you something, he asked, sudden excitement flaring in his eyes. Show me what? I'll show you how I travel in the forest. He saw my expression. Don't worry, you'll be very safe, and we'll get to your truck much faster. His mouth twitched up into that crooked smile, so beautiful, my heart nearly stopped. Will you turn into a bat? I asked wearily. He laughed louder than I'd ever heard. Like I haven't heard that one before. Right, I'm sure you get that all the time.
Who else knows you're a vampire?
Right. Who are you talking to, Edward?
All the time.
Come on, little coward, climb onto my back. I waited to see if he was kidding, but apparently he meant it. He smiled as he read my hesitation and reached out for me. My heart reacted. Even though he couldn't hear my thoughts, my pulse always gave me away. He then proceeded to sling me onto his back with very little effort on my part. Besides, when in place, clamping my legs and arms so tightly around him that would choke a normal person. It was like clinging to a stone. I'm a bit heavier than your average backpack, I warned. Ha, he snorted. I could almost hear his eyes rolling. I'd never seen him in such high spirits before. He startled me, suddenly grabbing my hand, pressing my palm to his face, and inhaling deeply. Oh, just like,
Got a whiff of her for...
easier all the time, he muttered. And then he was running.
We're not going to get the spider monkey line. That was Catherine Hardwicke added that for the movie. We can thank Catherine, but...
Catherine. If I'd ever feared death before in his presence, it was nothing compared to how I felt now. He streaked through the dark, thick underbrush of the forest like a bullet, like a ghost. There was no sound, no evidence that his feet touched the earth. His breathing never changed, never indicated any effort, but the trees flew by at deadly speeds, always missing us by inches. I was too terrified to close my eyes, though the cool forest air whipped against my face and burned them. I felt as if I was stupidly sticking my head out the window of an airplane in flight, and for the first time in my life, I felt the dizzy faintness of motion sickness. Then it was over. We'd hiked hours this morning to reach Edward's Meadow, and now, in a matter of minutes, we were back to the truck. Exhilarating, isn't it? His voice was high, excited. He stood motionless, waiting for me to climb down. I tried, but my muscles wouldn't respond. My arms and legs stayed locked around him while my head spun uncomfortably. Bella? He asked, anxious now. I think I need to lie down, I gasped. Oh, sorry. He waited for me, but I still couldn't move. I think I need help, I admitted. He laughed quietly, gently unloosened my stranglehold on his neck. There was no resisting the iron strength of his hands. Then he pulled me around to face him, cradling me in his arms like a small child. He held me for a moment, then carefully placed me on the springy ferns. How do you feel? He asked. I couldn't be sure how I felt. My head was spinning so crazily. Dizzy, I think. Put your head between your knees. I tried that, and it helped a little. I breathed in and out slowly, keeping my head very still. I felt him sitting beside me. The moments passed, and eventually I found that I could raise my head. There was a hollow ringing sound in my ears. I guess that wasn't the best idea, he mused. I tried to be positive, but my voice was weak. No, it was very interesting. You're as white as a ghost. No, you're as white as me. I think I should have closed my eyes. Remember that next time. Next time, I groaned. He laughed, his mood still radiant. Show off, I muttered. Open your eyes, Bella, he said quietly. And he was right there, his face so close to mine. His beauty stunned my mind. It was too much, an excess I couldn't grow accustomed to. I was thinking, while I was running, he paused. About not hitting trees, I hope. Silly Bella, he chuckled. Running is second nature to me. It's not something I have to think about. Show off, I muttered again. He smiled. No, he continued. I was thinking there was something I wanted to try. And he took my face into his hands again. I couldn't breathe. He hesitated, not in the normal way, the human way. Not the way a man might hesitate before he kissed a woman, to gauge her reaction, to see how he would be received. Perhaps he would hesitate to prolong the moment, the ideal moment of anticipation, sometimes better than the kiss itself. Edward hesitated to test himself, to see if this was safe, to make sure he was still in control of his need. And then his cold marble lips pressed very softly against mine.
Did not ask.
Dude. What neither of us was prepared for, was my response. Blood boiled under my skin, burned in my lips. My breath came out in a wild gasp. My fingers knotted in his hair, clutching him to me. My lips parted as I breathed in his heady scent. Immediately I felt him turn to unresponsive stone beneath my lips. His hands gently, but with irresistible force, pushed my face back. He just pulled his hands down. I opened my eyes and saw his guarded expression. Oops, I breathed. That's an understatement. His eyes were wild, his jaw clenched in an acute restraint, yet he didn't lapse from his perfect articulation. He held my face just inches from his. He dazzled my eyes. Should I tried to disengage myself, to give him some room. His hands refused to let me move so much an inch. No, it's tolerable. Wait for a moment, please. The beloved of a person said, no, you're tolerable.
You're tolerable.
As their hands are here.
It's tolerable. It's fine.
I can do this. His voice was polite, controlled. I kept my eyes on his, watched as the excitement in them faded and gentled. Then he smiled a surprisingly impish grin. There, he said, obviously pleased with himself. Tolerable, I asked. He laughed aloud. I'm stronger than I thought. It's nice to know.
Thank God.
I wish I could say the same. I'm sorry. You are only human after all. Thanks so much, I said, my voice acerbic. He was on his feet in one of those little, almost invisibly quick movements. He held out his hand to me, an unexpected gesture. I was so used to our standard of careful non-contact. I took his icy hand, needing the support more than I thought. My balance had not yet returned. Are you still faint from the run? Or was it my kissing expertise? How lighthearted, how human he seemed as he laughed now. His seraphic face untroubled. He was a different Edward than the one I had known, and I felt all the more besotted by him. It would cause me physical pain to be separated from him now. I can't be sure. I'm still woozy, I managed to respond. I think it's some of both, though. Maybe you should let me drive. Are you insane? I protested. I can drive better than you on your best day, he teased. You've much slower reflexes. I'm sure that's true, but I don't think my nerves or my truck could take it. Some trust, please, Bella. My hand was in my pocket, curled tightly around the key. I pursed my lips, deliberated, but shook my head with a tight grin. Nope, not a chance. He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Dude, it's her car! Shut up!
Being very controlling with this.
God. I started to step away from him, heading for the driver's side. He might have let me pass if I hadn't wobbled slightly. Then again, he might not have. His arm created an inescapable snare around my waist. Bella, I've already expected a great deal of personal effort at this point to keep you alive. I'm not about to let you behind the wheel of a vehicle when you can't even walk straight. Besides, friends don't let friends drive drunk, he quoted with a chuckle. I could smell the unbearably sweet fragrance coming off his chest. Drunk? I objected. You're intoxicated by my very presence. He was grinning that playful smirk again. I can't argue with that, I sighed. There was no way around it. I couldn't resist him in anything. I held the key high and dropped it, watching his hand flash like lightning and catch it soundlessly. Take it easy. My truck is a senior citizen. Very sensible, he approved. And are you not affected at all, I asked her, by my presence? Again, his mobile features transformed. His expression became soft, warm. He didn't answer at first. He simply bent his face to mine and brushed his lips slowly along my jaw, from my ear to my chin, back and forth. I trembled. Regardless, he finally murmured, I have better reflexes.
Wow. That was a good one.
Oh, Edward.
We got some good lines in there. Some of the iconic lines, huh?
Yes.
That was fun. Oh, nice. Well, thanks for tuning in. This has been Lunchtime Listens. With that, thanks for listening. I'm Emily.
I'm Megan.
See you next time.
Bye.